Welcome everyone to our webinar today. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Taylor McGowan. My pronouns are she, her, and I am pleased to introduce the Brain Inflammation Collaborative team in our presentation for you today. So start with a couple of housekeeping things. Here's our agenda. We'll run through just a couple of heads ups, FYIs, what to expect, and then we'll jump right into our speakers. If you have any questions that come up during the presentations, please drop them in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. We will be sharing kind of written out, summarized answers to as many questions as we can after the webinar, in addition to answering questions after the presenters are finished. This webinar is being recorded. It's also being transcribed. We'll have all of those resources available for you after the fact so that you can come back and reference and share as needed. Like I said, utilize the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and a short survey will pop up when the webinar is complete. It'd be great if you could fill that out and let us know how we did. Let us know how we can do better next time. Improvement is never done. So it's important that we continue to work on that. So, all right. So I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Matthew Menendez is the Director of Science Communications here at the Brain Inflammation Collaborative. So Matt, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, well, good afternoon. First off, big thank you for those who took the time to attend this webinar today. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to communicate what my colleagues at the Brain Inflammation Collaborative have been diligently working on for the past several years. And so the goal of this talk is to not just explain why clinical research moves slow, but more importantly, our vision for accelerating it. But first, I want to convince you that even individuals who are on the front lines of clinical research underestimate just how slow science moves. An example of this is the ad I'm showing here on the left-hand side of the screen. So this was an ad that was in the Washington Post back in 1969. And now the purpose of this ad was to pressure the Nixon administration and other individuals of Congress to increase the budget for cancer research. And I just want to quickly read a small section of this ad. It said, this was from Dr. Sidney Farmer, who was the former president of the American Cancer Society, and then at this time was the president of the Citizens Committee for the Conquest of Cancer. He says, quote, "We are close to a cure for cancer. We lack only the kind of money and comprehensive planning that went into putting a man on the moon." And the ad further says at the bottom, "Why don't we try to conquer cancer by America's 200th birthday?" So that would have been 7 years from the time in which this ad was published. So we know now 55 years later, we still don't have a universal cure for cancer, even though we spent well over hundreds of billions of dollars from the federal government. And so the conclusion is that, research moves a lot slower than even experts anticipate. And this is in a field where the health professionals have largely been on the same page. I mean, they understand the biological drivers of cancer, how to diagnose it, and how to treat it. And you cannot say the same thing for many complex chronic inflammatory conditions, especially those that are driven by neuroinflammation. One example of this is from Time magazine. There was an article that was published by two psychiatrists from 1970. And these psychiatrists extensively reviewed the case reports from the Royal Hospital outbreak in London back in 1955. And this is when there were 292 hospital staff that were hospitalized with abrupt fatigue, muscle weakness, and neurological symptoms. And most of these individuals that came down with this condition were women. So these two psychiatrists concluded, as you can see from the title of this article, that this was just simply a case of mass hysteria. And when you go further in time, back in 1988, that was when the CDC first named myalgic encephalomyelitis as chronic fatigue syndrome. And so the CDC, which is, in addition to the NIH, is one of the agencies that provides funding for biomedical research. They couldn't even get the name right. Chronic fatigue syndrome is very insulting for anyone that suffers from myalgic encephalomyelitis because this condition is more than just chronic fatigue, as many in the audience probably know. And then in 2015, the Institute of Medicine, which is now the National Academy of Medicine, established the diagnostic criteria for ME/CFS. So this took an extremely long time from characterizing this condition to accepting it to now establishing diagnostic criteria for this condition. And so this last part is key because many researchers need a source of patient samples to study the disease, to understand the disease, so that they can advance therapies to, quote unquote, conquer this condition, or at least reduce the burden of this condition for many of those living with chronic conditions. But the fact that it took so long just to even establish diagnostic criteria is one of many reasons why research moves incredibly slow for many of these conditions. This isn't just for ME, this is chronic Lyme, Pandas, PANS, and even long COVID. And so one of the many ways in which researchers try to tackle these conditions is to establish these dedicated research centers or these clinics, which consist of a group of specialists that are patient facing. So they see patients with these conditions in their clinic, and maybe they would enroll these patients into clinical studies or clinical trials. But a lot of these studies are generally small in number because a lot of the patients are excluded. So this could be from several different reasons. One in which these conditions are usually they usually exclude non-English speaking individuals. And of course, the burden of this disease really prevents travel long distances to the sites of the clinical study or the clinical trial, which will exclude a large number of individuals enrolling in the trial. And so the results that are obtained from these studies don't accurately depict the broader patient population. And the last thing is that the data that is collected from these studies is generally siloed. So a patient from a different part of the country can't tap into the biological samples that were obtained or the patient health history to answer other important questions about the condition. And then, of course, there are individual research scientists, such as principal investigators, that maybe they run a lab at a medical college and they have postdocs or graduate students in their lab conducting basic research. And so these individuals are not part of a broader research group, and they're not patient facing, right? So they have limited access to patient samples, but they would maybe primarily generate a lot of data using mouse models of disease or maybe even cell culture experiments. But let's hypothetically say that they make a really big discovery in a mouse model of disease. Let's say they find a biomarker for chronic Lyme, or maybe it's long COVID. But again, this is generated in a mouse model of disease. So how do they take that next step to determine whether or not their discovery is clinically meaningful? In other words, how do they access the human patients to study this phenotype they discovered in a mouse? And so the traditional approach is primarily based on first trying very, very hard to obtain some preliminary data or maybe a pilot study in a small group of individuals with the condition. And then if they find that they are on the right tracks with this discovery, then they would take that preliminary data from the pilot experiment, combine it with their mouse data, and try to write a grant to the NIH to submit this to fund a much larger, more robust, more complex study. And so assuming that they don't contract the research out to a contract research organization, they do it in-house. This would involve, building clinical research team, designing patient surveys, recruiting patients and the controls. And I want to emphasize that not only is recruiting patients obviously very important, but equally important is in recruiting the proper controls. Because without the proper controls, you cannot accurately interpret the data. So you can't draw any meaningful conclusions from the data without the proper, age and sex match controls. And the controls might be very different from study to study. For example, the best control in a long COVID study is an individual who has successfully recovered from long COVID. Um, so if anyone is listening and wants to participate in, as a healthy control, wants to participate in the app, I encourage you to do so. Anyways, as a side note. But after the patients arrive, you log the health history, the vitals, collect blood samples, you analyze the results. We're talking about several years of work, and again, the data may not accurately reflect the broader patient population because there are a lot of individuals that may be excluded from such a study. But now let's compare that to a clinical research platform or research platform that is more open sourced, such as that of unhide. So this would involve just submitting a application to the unhide team for review, and then the researcher, instead of recruiting all these patients to their location, they could remotely tap in to individuals who are enrolled in the platform, who have their health data already logged on the platform. And maybe they could even tap into biometric data from smartwatches, for example. So shown on the screen, this black circle here is representing a smartwatch, or maybe it's an Oura ring to access not only patient data that is manually logged by the patient themselves, but also biometric data. And this is assuming, of course, that the patients are consented to do that. Then you can also ship equipment. Maybe it's blood collection devices so that they can go to a local clinic to get a blood drawn so they can ship it back to the researcher. Or maybe the study involves monitoring glucose levels. You can ship a glucose monitor to that individual, whatever it might be. And there is no patient recruitment involved, or there's minimal patient recruitment involved, depending on how many individuals are enrolled on the platform that meet that particular need for the researcher. And this would include not only mild, but also severe cases, because there would be no travel time needed. So if you compare the traditional approach that I described earlier versus that of a clinical research application such as unhide, you can see that the time to generate the data is significantly reduced. So we're going from 1.5 to 3 years down to 3 to 9 months. The cost is significantly reduced as well. And the number of patients that could be potentially reached is really only limited by the number of participants that are currently enrolled on the platform. And we would argue that the probability of a study being started and finished is higher, especially if we have adequate numbers of participants and controls that are enrolled already on the platform. And another superpower of unhide is the ability for researchers to tap into these patients and do some preliminary screening to see if they're on the right tracks with some of their findings that they identify in mouse models of disease. And if they are on the right track, then they can scale up and do a more robust, in-depth study. And so, for the past 2 years working at the Brain Inflammation Collaborative, I like to draw analogies to some of the things that I write here for BIC. And one of the analogies I've always thought is that unhide is just a bridge that is remotely connecting the researchers to the patients. And so this could be researchers from inside our own organization, the Brain Inflammation Collaborative. It could be researchers, as I mentioned, from data centers, individual PIs, but also physicians. So, for example, if there is a physician who is currently a specialist in treating pandas and PANS, and they're constantly visiting or seeing patients with this condition, and maybe they are treating using a novel approach that others in the field are not currently using, and they put some numbers on it that there's about a 70% successful response rate. Maybe they could use the app to encourage their patients to enroll in the app and the platform before coming to the doctor's office to establish baseline metrics. And then after they treat, they could monitor the success of that therapy, and maybe even identify why a subgroup of individuals are not responding to the treatment, while another subgroup are positively responding to the treatment to try to tease apart what might be influencing the success of a particular therapy. And then, of course, that data could be used to write a paper that could be shared with the world, and inform clinical decisions from other physicians treating the condition as to what works and what doesn't work. Because, research is absolutely a team sport. But there's also benefits to the patient as well. This isn't just for the researchers. So the patient benefit could be tracking their symptoms, logging medical test results, because many individuals that have these complex chronic conditions are having to jump from specialist to specialist, and there's a lot of tests that are performed along the way. Tracking these test results could be beneficial, as well as how they feel throughout the day. And they could share this with their clinician to help them make more informed clinical decisions. And then also there's some key features that we've just rolled out recently. One is that we've opened this up for individuals speaking Spanish and children ages 2 up, so 2+ and adults. So with that, I thank you for listening. And if you want to drop a question in the chat box, I'm happy to try to answer that for you. Thank you for listening.
All right, we'll turn it over to Megan to talk about some of the findings so far. Megan Fitzgerald is the principal investigator for the Brain Inflammation Collaborative. So turn it over to you, Megan.
Thank you. Right, so I'm going to talk to you about some of the data that's currently in the platform. The majority of people in the platform have ME or long COVID. A bit about the history of the unhide platform. This originated out of a collaborative effort with Solve ME, and they had a slightly different iteration, which was called Solve Together, and it initially was designed to help study ME. They added long COVID and healthy controls as well. And now that the Brain Inflammation Collaborative is administering and running the platform, we are adding more diagnoses. And I'll get more into the specifics of that during the talk. But a lot of the data that you're going to see is based on the participants who have long COVID and ME, because that's the bulk of the people who are currently in the platform. So this is first a broad overview of what unhide is and looks like. As Matt had outlined, it's an online health platform. You can access it via an app on a phone or via your web browser if that's more comfortable. This can be used to track symptoms, to connect wearable devices, download symptom data reports, complete surveys, set pacing notifications, and to identify patterns in health over time. And in the previous talk that I gave in our previous webinar, I went a bit more into what this all looked like. So if you check out our previous webinars on our webpage, you can see a bit more about that. And as Matt had said, this also allows participants to connect with researchers and participate directly in research studies. It's run by the nonprofit, the Brain Inflammation Collaborative, and we leverage My Data Helps, which is our service provider for this platform. It's free for all participants, and your data will never be sold or used for advertising purposes. And I should add, it will never be put behind a paywall, which a number of apps, if you use those attractions, you're in danger of losing a lot of access to a lot of your information because they could put it behind a paywall. So it's one advantage of participating in an app that is run by a nonprofit. There are a lot of unmet healthcare needs in complex chronic conditions like long COVID and ME. Matt had alluded to some of the real injustices in the history of the study of ME. And to this date, it's a condition that was described historically in the scientific and medical literature as far back as you can go. But to this date, there are no approved treatments for these and other conditions, infection-associated chronic conditions. And these conditions often have multiple comorbidities, but they're rarely studied in that context. There's also been a historical exclusion of children and teenagers from research studies on these conditions. And this can lead to a real trial and error pattern for patients and their care providers who are kind of flying blind and trying to figure out what works for each individual without a lot of data to inform that. Unhide can help to provide real-time feedback on symptoms and treatments, and this can help users recognize patterns in their health. And to get a little bit more into this, patients, by using the app, can visualize timelines and symptom graphs, and they can share these with their care providers. And so this can help support these individualized evidence-informed treatment plans. Long COVID and ME, along with a lot of other neuroimmune and autoimmune conditions, are often relapsing, remitting conditions. So some days you'll feel a lot better, some days you'll feel a lot worse. And it can be really hard to identify both triggers as well as treatments that work. If you start a treatment that might be effective, but you're heading into a crash, for example, a crash refers to a symptom exacerbation. It's a term that patients often use, if there are any care providers watching this. But if you're heading into a crash, and you're not aware of any, start a new treatment, you might think, that treatment didn't work, but Unhide can help tease apart these patterns in your own health and can hopefully help participants realize, whether treatment is helping over the long term, which symptoms it might be helping, which ones it isn't really making a difference in, and so on. And this can overcome challenges on relying on memory or paper logging of symptoms. I've gone to doctor's appointments with notes on various pieces of paper before. And as long as I remember to log my symptoms, it's much easier for me and my care providers to interpret these, my illness history, if I use a platform like Unhide. And as I mentioned, this platform is free and it's secure. For researchers, on the other hand, this can consolidate symptom and treatment data alongside the information that's collected from wearable devices and demographics, validated survey instruments, and the custom questionnaires. And I'll get more into those items in future slides. It allows patient-friendly data collection on the longitudinal natural history of complex chronic conditions. So I'm going to start with the validated survey tools that are in the platform. The reason that the use of validated survey tools is so important is because these tools are used to study different conditions worldwide and historically as well. So implementing these through the platform can allow researchers to compare what patients are reporting who use Unhide to other conditions across time. And we also have wearables that can be in the platform, called a BYOD configuration, bring your own device. One of the changes that Brain Inflammation Collaborative made when we recently took over the administration of the platform is that we expanded the types of wearables that can be connected to Unhide. So most popular devices can now be integrated with Unhide, ranging from Apple Health and Fitbit to Garmin and Oura rings, and as well as more rare devices like the Omron. Right now in the platform, we have almost 2,000 users who have wearable devices that are connected to their accounts in Unhide. These are the specific validated survey tools that are in Unhide. We have tried to be very thoughtful in terms of the cadence at which these are presented, as well as which instruments we've chosen, so that we're maximizing data collection while minimizing the burden to different patients. Because it can be a lot if you're presented with all of these survey instruments all at once to try to fill out, particularly for those of us with energy-limiting illnesses. So you can see in the column here, the cadence. These different tools are presented at different cadences. Some are presented right at enrollment so that patients can start then, and then some won't be presented until a month after, and then quarterly or biannually after that, so that people are not overwhelmed. And some of these are used. FUNCAP 27 is specifically developed for long COVID and ME. That's a newer survey instrument that we've recently implemented in the platform. We've also added GAD-7. It's a quick 7-questionnaire that helps people track impacts on mood and mental health. And as Matt had mentioned, we have just launched the pediatric platform, so all of these are new. The ones that are 13 plus are only available to teenagers, and we also have a caregiver strain index integrated into the pediatric platform that parents can fill out to see how they're doing as well. Now, we've also developed here at the Brain Inflammation Collaborative a number of surveys that are integrated into the platform. We have a mood and behavioral survey that was developed in conjunction with patient experts on PANS and PANDAS, but it's open to all participants in the platform. And we hope that this will better shine a light on some of the mood and behavioral effects of infection-associated chronic conditions, autoimmune diseases, etc., which has been really understudied in a sensitive way, where these conditions themselves are not being psychologized, are not being attributed to hysteria. But we are acknowledging that these conditions which elicit inflammation, systemic inflammation and neuroinflammation, also can result in some mood and behavioral changes for people who are experiencing them. And we're trying to better understand that and better understand the treatments that work for people. We have a short 6-question questionnaire about what helps, what doesn't. I presented some of that data in the webinar that we had recently in conjunction with Solve ME. And of course, we have surveys about illness history, demographics, family medical history, narrative forms, and comorbidities as well, so we can better understand the health history of people on the platform. In addition to those studies that we've developed at the Brain Inflammation Collaborative, we've also developed a number of studies in collaboration with outside researchers, and these are here. The study run by Dr. David Esteban from Vassar. It's actually a really nice collaborative effort. It was funded by the Patient-Led Research Collaborators Patient-Led Research Fund. It was originally hosted through Solve ME, and Dr. Esteban also had a Ramsey Award from Solve ME. And now we're helping to finish out that study with the Brain Inflammation Collaborative. It's in analysis phase now. We're also really excited to launch a study that we have worked on with a Lyme disease expert, Dr. Mara Cavaldina from Columbia University. This is a brain fog study. Brain fog is one of the most commonly reported symptoms of many overlapping conditions, and yet it's very poorly described in the literature. So we're trying to better quantify the effects of brain fog and to better understand how people describe it, what words they use, what effects it has on people's life and lifestyles, what helps it and what doesn't help it. So I would encourage all of you all to check out that study. If you're a user of the platform and it hasn't been delivered yet, it will be on Monday. We've rolled it out to new users first, and then it'll be rolled out to existing users. We also have upcoming collaborations with Dr. Jenny Frankovich, who is a PANS and PANDAS expert, and potentially a lactate study as well. We try to be really conscientious about how all of the survey research is conducted on patients. We want to maximize the information that we get and minimize patient burden. So we provide time estimates for every study that we estimate is circled in blue, and crucially, participants can take a break and come back. So the platform that we're using with My Data Helps allows people to save their data and to come back and to complete the surveys, if they get tired, if they get interrupted, anything like that. And wherever possible, I can add, particularly for the validated survey instruments, participants will be able to track their scores. And this is something, again, that we are currently working on and rolling out, so that if you are completing, for instance, the GAD-7 over time, you will be able to see how your score changes over time. So now I'm going to be talking a bit more about who is using our platform. This is the geographic distribution of the participants in unhide by metro area. Now, I will note that not on this map, not included on this map is Alaska and Hawaii, and we do have participants there as well. And in fact, we get some really nice emails from participants in Alaska thanking us for allowing them to participate in clinical studies despite, fairly far-flung locations. These are definitely populations that are not being reached by traditional clinical research studies because they aren't in major metro areas. But of course, anybody in the US can participate. In terms of our sex and gender breakdown, we have very predominantly female users. 83.1% are reporting that they are female at birth, about 17% male. And this mirrors prevalent studies of ME/CFS, as well as somewhat long COVID as well, which is being found to have a female predominance, similarly to many autoimmune conditions. So this is not very surprising that we have such a female predominance in our platform. What is pleasantly surprising is our age demographics. We only have 0.2% right now. We've only just started enrollment in the pediatrics, so please do spread the word that we are actively recruiting children and teenagers, but we've only just built that platform. However, I do want to point out that at the opposite end of the lifespan, we have almost 20% of our users are over the age of 65. This is a population who has been traditionally quite difficult to recruit, particularly for digital health work. And about another 20% is in the 55 to 65 age range. So I want to thank all of you if you're participating or in that population especially, and contributing to this incredibly valuable data set. It's just really important to understand how these conditions impact people across the entire lifespan. And historically, the older populations have been more difficult to reach. So I'm really grateful and thankful and excited about the potential that we have in this data, particularly in the older cohort that we have. However, that said, we have, like many other studies, we are currently have underrepresentation of historically marginalized populations. Almost 93% of our users identify as white, and this can be a multi-select as well. That's how this question is presented, and it is also an optional question. So this is problematic because this does not reflect the impact that these conditions have on society. So we are actively, when we got this data, we are actively prioritizing tools that can help facilitate the participation of historically marginalized populations, including, as Matt had said, the upcoming rollout of the full Spanish language translation of the platform. That's just finishing up with IRB review now and should be rolled out in upcoming days to weeks. And we're very excited about that. And we're looking for partners to help get the word out about that as well. The next couple of slides, I'm going to speak about the comorbidities that people on our platform have. And this is something that is, again, I think very interesting and really critical to understand. This first slide shows about comorbidities that people with ME/CFS have. C, anxiety, and depression are the top two here. And it's one of the reasons that, motivated us to look a little bit more closely at mental health in the population in our platform by rolling out instruments like the Mood and Behavioral Survey, as well as adding validated survey tools like GAD-7 so that people can help monitor how they're doing in terms of their mental health. Also on here, you'll see sleep disorders, well represented insomnia, narcolepsy, as well as sleep apnea, thyroid disorders, and reproductive disorders, endometriosis. I would venture to guess that diagnoses such as endometriosis, POTS, dysautonomia are probably underrepresented on this chart just because I feel like they are underdiagnosed in our population. There are really, it can be really difficult to get those conditions diagnosed clinically. And I suspect that a number of people may have these conditions without realizing it or without having been officially diagnosed with them. Now you can see the long COVID population has a really similar breakdown of comorbidities, with anxiety and depression being the top two. And again, sleep disorders very prevalent, as well as reproductive disorders. I didn't mention HIV/AIDS is also one that is listed by approximately 5% of our participants in each long COVID and ME category. So this is a word cloud that shows, the relative prevalence of the different diagnoses that people have listed in their open answer format. And you can see the patterns of these overlapping symptoms. And this could reveal some shared mechanisms across long COVID and ME/CFS, as well as other related neuroinflammatory diseases and disorders. I'm going to transition into our recent additions and what's coming next down the pipeline. So as I had mentioned earlier in the talk, and then as I hope hammered home with the comorbidities slide, we've added a number of neuroinflammatory conditions to unhide so that we can study these conditions in conglomerate rather than in an isolation. Other infection-associated chronic conditions like chronic Lyme and PANS and PANDAS, we've added to the platform. And we'd also like to recruit participants who have other neuroimmune, developmental, autonomic, and neurological conditions that are indicative of neuroinflammation, like migraines, dysautonomia, POTS, and multiple sclerosis. In addition, we have behavioral and mood disorders that are tied to neuroinflammation, like anxiety, depression, PTSD, OCD, eating disorders, and bipolar disorder. A lot of us who have gone through, the chronic illness diagnostic pathway. I'm sure a lot of us were diagnosed first with anxiety or depression. And while that might be a comorbidity, it often doesn't tell the full story. And people who have infection-associated chronic conditions, for example, might be resistant to treatment with traditional treatment modalities for anxiety and depression, and these symptoms might not resolve until the underlying cause, which is neuroinflammation that's caused by ME or long COVID, is treated. We've also added autoimmune diseases like lupus, Sjogren's, rheumatoid arthritis, myasthenia gravis, and other related conditions, inflammatory GI conditions, and, as I mentioned, reproductive health conditions. In addition to what we currently have in unhide, we have legacy data from U+ME, which is a former platform that was designed to study ME, and this contains legacy data that dates back for over a decade. About 1,000 U+ME participants have enrolled in Solve Together and unhide, and we are currently in progress of integrating this data. So please do get in contact with us if you are a researcher who would be interested in working with this rich longitudinal data set. As Matt had mentioned, and I had mentioned previously, we are also expanding to include Spanish-speaking populations, and we're very excited about that upcoming launch. And finally, I want to finish up my part of today's presentation by speaking about the critical importance of the work that we've done in including pediatrics. And again, this is live. This has been rolled out in October, and we are actively recruiting children and teenagers to the platform, and as well as their caregivers. Children and teenagers are affected by ME/CFS and long COVID and related conditions. However, their symptom presentation might be different from adults. This is really important to recognize because this can lead to missed or delayed diagnoses in pediatrics, because their clinical care providers might be thinking of, the adult symptom profile and then evaluating a child, and the symptom profile is often considerably different in children. And so this underdiagnosis, and as well as the frequent exclusion of children and teenagers from long COVID research studies, can really lead to feelings of isolation in kids and teenagers experiencing these conditions, as well as their families. Our platform design allows a comparison of these pediatric groups to other infection-associated chronic conditions in pediatrics directly, and some other IACCs include PANS and PANDAS, which are historically more well-characterized, though still understudied. There is a scientific importance as well of studying IACCs across the lifespan to better understand long-term effects of these chronic conditions. And sorry if for the acronym IACCs, as abbreviated here, to mean infection-associated chronic conditions, if you aren't familiar with that term. Long COVID is estimated to become the #1 most prevalent chronic health condition in children in the US. And it's estimated to surpass asthma. So this is a huge problem for individuals, for society, for us as a society, if we're not understanding and diagnosing this condition properly in pediatrics. And I'm going to close with 2 quotes from children who are living with long COVID. The first is from Natalie, 17, who said, "I don't really dare to have dreams anymore now that I have long COVID. My first goal or dream is to get better." And on what he wishes for but cannot do, says Paul, who's only 9 years old, be with friends a lot because I can't manage. If I can manage that day, the day after I get really, really tired and can barely do anything at all. I think any of us who are living with these conditions can absolutely resonate with both of these quotes. And I mean, I really can't imagine going through this as a child, and what these children and their families must be going through. And so with that, I will pass this off to Christy. And thank you so much for your attendance and your attention.
Okay, thank you, Matt and Megan, for helping to explain the uniqueness of what we're doing and offering to patients and researchers. I know that we don't have a ton of time left, so I'll try to do mine kind of quickly here, but there's so much important stuff to say, and some of it overlaps a little bit with Megan, especially in the pediatric space, but I think it's really important that we highlight that. I'm going to be talking about the future of digital patient-centered research and, of course, the funding needs for sustainability. I apologize for any coughing or sniffing as I'm getting over a little bug here. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time going through some of the highlights of what we're trying to do. Matt and Megan did a great job in talking through why research is expensive, why it takes so long, and the details of what data we have and what we're collecting. I think it's important to note the patient's involvement and emphasis. In a time where our world has become very digitally connected and driven, this is an efficient and detailed way to collect data, and then to share it through research publications, follow-up research, or through conversations with clinicians, patients, and their caregivers. As we head towards an increase in digital and decentralized trials, this can be quite far-reaching in participation and impact. There's a lot that can be captured to the unhide platform. One of the really great things about using unhide is the flexibility for the patient's participation. They can do it as they're able and from a bed or wherever they're comfortable. It's fully remote and captures data passively through wearables or episodic collection through the surveys themselves. We can include those who aren't able to travel for financial or health reasons. This is a huge cost savings for research as we eliminate the cost for travel to and from sites and for the research sites and staffing themselves. We also value the importance of accommodating diverse needs, screen readers, those types of things. Our Spanish version will be rolled out soon, and we hope to include additional languages as funding allows. As a digital bridge, we hope we can improve on the needs to improve diversity, provide greater ability to participate, and most importantly, lower the burden for participation. Return of information so that participants can directly advocate for themselves, whether it's for better care or treatments or even insurance needs. We want better engagement with the participants through data visualization and a better understanding of their own data as well as the studies themselves. This large-scale data collection matters because we need to include as many as we can in this research to meet the heterogeneous needs of this complex group of patients. Now, I know that Megan did speak about the importance of the pediatric population, but I wanted to speak a little bit more about it because it really is super important. This is a picture of my daughter when she was 5, and she was already experiencing some minor autonomic symptoms that we know occur in POTS and long COVID, as well as some mast cell symptoms, mild EDS, and hypermobility symptoms. I knew nothing of the chronic illness world, let alone the names of some of her upcoming diagnoses she would receive as an 11-year-old. And frankly, neither did our family practitioner. Every symptom was explained away as she's more sensitive, just more aware of her body, she's just experiencing growing pains, she has a small stomach, and on and on. After she was initially diagnosed with POTS at age 11 and we were trying to find treatments, I spent late nights Googling and searching for our next thing to try. Through an advocacy group that I was already involved in, I learned about a lab at the University of Oklahoma that was only enrolling adults. They were looking to identify antibodies potentially found in POTS and the impact of immune modulating treatment. The lab was in danger of losing its funding, and while I worked to help find additional funding, I asked if they could include my daughter in the study. And then I had a quick education in protocols and research in general on the difficulties in allowing pediatric patients to enroll. The original protocol was written for 18 and older, but they could make some changes, and they could go as low as 13, which at that time she was 12, and 13 was only a few months away. Adding under 12 was something that was not in the cards, and keep the study on track. So we just waited a couple of months for her to turn 13, and she became the first patient enrolled as an under 18 in the study. We tracked her symptoms, both physical and mental, each month on a sheet of paper, which we sent back to the researcher with a monthly blood sample. Her early intervention, I believe, allowed her to swim competitively in college, and now she's completing a Master of Anesthesiology program. Pediatric voices have been left out of the narrative for too long. Barriers to research are high. Regulatory requirements for including children are complicated and require those with expertise. We wanted to make sure we could provide a place for researchers to collect this data without that as a barrier. Adults have long histories of unexplained symptoms, like my daughter. How do we get that missing history documented so that we can diagnose earlier or identify those at risk? How do we educate society about chronic illness, just like we do about cancer or diabetes or heart disease? It should be discussed early on with pediatricians and family practitioners for everyone. And when there are symptoms that don't make sense or your family history indicates a genetic predisposition, more discussion is needed. We need to learn how these illnesses progress and provide a roadmap for clinicians for not only things to watch, for treatment protocols. Clinicians are often at a loss to prescribe off-label in the chronic illness world because it's out of their comfort zone. We need your help in getting this done. Now, I wanted to talk just really brief about each of our studies because these are some really great studies, and I know Megan did mention them. You can go to our research website, which is unhidenow.org, to learn about each of these studies. The medications of special interest is something that's coming up in early 2026, so there isn't any information on that yet. But you can also learn how you can get involved. Our studies, like the brain fog questionnaire, not only help to describe how people experience it, but it could be used to develop criteria for diagnosing brain fog itself. How does a 6-year-old, how does a 15-year-old, how does a 40-year-old describe brain fog? And a clinician can use that information to hopefully diagnose better. What helped, what didn't? This study is where participants can share which treatment strategies or interventions improved or worsened their symptoms, creating a clearer picture of what actually works in daily life. The response to the survey has exceeded our expectations, and we look forward to sharing more on this in upcoming webinars. And some of the preliminary data, like Megan mentioned, was in a joint webinar we did with Solve ME in October. The mood and behavioral questionnaire was created in-house, and it explores how the brain and the body interact to influence emotions, focus, and daily life activities. We're collecting data on how people experience a range of challenges such as anxiety, sleep disturbance, sensory sensitivity, and difficulties with attention, planning, or executive function. Now, those were all things that my daughter had a lot of difficulties with, so I think it's going to be really impactful to quantify those things. The medications of special interest, like I mentioned, will help collect details of patients with autoimmune, neuropsychiatric, or post-infectious disorders, along with specific drug treatments they've tried. Because these conditions share a similar biologic basis with other autoimmune conditions, FDA-approved treatments for conditions like IBD, psoriasis, arthritis may help people with illnesses with connections to autoimmunity. And we'll, again, have more information on that in early 2026. So as many of you know, the Brain Inflammation Collaborative was started out for a need for more and oftentimes better research in the infection-triggered chronic illness space. I co-founded the Brain Inflammation Collaborative because although I loved all of the advocacy work that I was already doing, I was frustrated with the lack of collaboration between organizations and the responses from people in general on how little they knew about chronic illness itself. The dollars in this space are hard to come by, and we need to work together if we're going to make meaningful progress. Recreating tools and platforms, this is something that is a real issue, and we see it again and again, and we need to better utilize the existing tools with the dollars in the space. That's why we worked with SolveME to combine our similar research platforms. Collaboration with community partners is key to transforming this space. We've built strong partnerships with key advocacy groups such as Long COVID Families, Solving MS, and SolveME, among others. Partnering with researchers like Megan mentioned, Columbia, Stanford, Vassar are equally important, and we'll seek to actively build and grow upon these collaborations. Funding needs are always an issue. Parents, patients, including kids, are losing precious time with friends and family. This group of infection-driven chronic illnesses is collectively in the millions, but yet many are left to feel so invisible and so forgotten. It's easy for the rest of the world to move on while this group struggles to literally get out of bed or find enjoyment. I could tell her story 1,000,000 times to a friend, and the next time I saw them, they asked if my daughter was better, or if I'd tried the homemade soap they had told me about. So let us know if you know of other funding sources looking to advance research in the pediatric space, the women's health space, or in infection-associated chronic condition space. And today, please make a difference. Help us provide a place for this crucial research to happen. Your donation matters, and you can visit braininflammation.org/give. And I am so appreciative of the people that have attended today and people that are going to watch the recording. And, we're just really excited that we were able to launch and really get started on the research. So thank you.
All right. I'm just going to make sure that my screen share is working. Perfect. All right. So I have pulled up a slide that kind of summarizes some of the things that we've talked about today and has a quick QR code if you're interested in participating. Well, obviously, this will be part of what we send out after the webinar today. All right, so since we only have a few more minutes, we'll just address a question or two. And then, like I said, we'll answer as many as we can after the fact, and we'll share answers in our newsletter and through other methods so that we can get you all the information that you're looking for. Again, here's the QR code to sign up for our newsletter. If you're not already, if you registered for this webinar and you consented to email communications, then you're good to go. And if you didn't, then here's that link. So I will go ahead and jump to a question for Megan. What tests can a patient request to show brain inflammation? Are there any wearables for tracking it? And what can patients do to lower inflammation in the brain?
Right. So in terms of tests that you might be able to request at your doctor's office, there really isn't much for complex chronic conditions. They are Right now, in studies like Recover, they're considering looking at blood markers like IL-6, as well as markers of, there's a cell type in the brain called glia and specific subtypes called astrocytes. So there can be markers when they are degraded. So GFAP might be another blood test. And there's neurofilament light chain 1 is another one. And these can show up in conditions like stroke, like TBI. But what we know from the studies in those conditions is there is kind of a window where those markers are high. Probably IL-6 would be the best bet in terms of a blood marker, but it's not going to show up for everybody. And I don't know if any of y'all have been down the MCAS testing, mast cell activation syndrome, which is a fairly common comorbidity of a number of these conditions, particularly long COVID. The marker for that would be histamine, but it's, again, this is one that it's really hard to get at clinically. There's a 24-hour urine test that histamine can be elevated as well as a blood test. But for some people who respond really well to antihistamines, and it doesn't show up as elevated. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that you can respond really well for treatments. And the reason I'm saying MCAS is neuroinflammatory is because there are mast cells right in the brain. And if these cells are activated, that's neuroinflammation as well. So just to clarify that. So yeah, it's a difficult question. As far as I know, there are no wearables that can track neuroinflammation directly. The only device that I know of that can track like dysautonomia is the Lumion device, which is in the ear. But that's dysautonomia. That's not, not strictly neuroinflammation.
All right, we'll just do one more question. Can any of you speak to what specialties are trained in identifying, diagnosing, treating ME?
Unfortunately, there really aren't any, and I'd love to answer the question live about the patient data too, if we have a second, Taylor, as well. I just think that's important for anyone who might be listening. But unfortunately, I'll go back to that first question, which is also very important in its own way. Unfortunately, there really aren't any. As a matter of fact, ME CFS is often not taught in the med school curriculum or in grad school. I have a PhD in neuroscience, and I didn't learn about ME CFS until I was in graduate school and studying suicidality and doing postmortem human work, and came across a number of studies showing differences in these patient cohort with ME CFS. This was before I developed the condition myself, years before, and it really isn't taught. And there are a number of initiatives to increase awareness around this. And, we had presented at IACFS-ME, which is a conference that is trying to educate care providers around this. But this is after they've received their MDs, so there really isn't a specialty that is well trained. There are some infectious disease doctors who have made this their life's work and their specialty, but there aren't enough care providers out there. And that's something that we will hopefully help provide data, and other advocacy groups like Solve ME, and I believe PLRC had an initiative as well in terms of educating care providers. So it's absolutely critical. So thank you for that question. And is it okay, Taylor, if I go on to answer that quickly about the patient data?
Please do. Yeah.
This is just really important. I want to specify we use My Data Helps, and one reason that we partnered with them is because they've built this whole HIPAA compliant system that's used by other healthcare systems. It's fully encrypted, both when your data is at rest as well as when it's in transit. We have to use two-factor authentication and role-based access control. So only people who have the right permissions can access specific participant data. Whenever we at Unhide are working with partners, we would be sharing de-identified data. So these are data that has been stripped of any identifying information in it. It complies with, our platform complies with regulations like FDA regulations, and has additional security methods, tokens and public key authentication. And I think, I just want to speak to being a nonprofit as well. We have, and doing research and IRB approved research, we have legal and ethical obligations that exceed anything that is in kind of the private research space or the private app space. So, I do feel more comfortable using our platform than I do a lot of the private apps for that exact reason, because there aren't these kind of guarantees of privacy in many of the for-profit app spaces. But that said, I know it's Giving Tuesday and all that, so I will say, we do need help paying for this. We do pay Care Evolution for all of the measures, and it's not cheap to ensure all this compliance. I don't know if Christy, you want to add anything onto that?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things of why the Brain Inflammation Collaborative was started, is to get rid of some of these barriers. And the IRB, every time we get something approved, costs money as well. And storing the data costs money, our staff time, and we want to work with groups, and if they have outside funding, it can be helpful if they can pay for a portion of the costs that we endure. But we also want research to get done, so we're looking to work with groups that have great projects and just try to get it done through donors, and making sure that we are pushing forward this research, because these patients have been waiting. My daughter's been waiting for 14 years. So I think that it's time.
This QR code gets you straight to braininflammation.org/give to make a gift. And here are our social media handles. Please follow us for the latest information and to stay in touch about upcoming launches and different initiatives that we have going on. All right. So thank you all so much for your time. Please fill out that survey.
I'm just going to add that Matt does a great job with our social media. So if you're interested in learning some of the science pieces, please follow us, especially on X and LinkedIn, and you can learn a lot of great things.
Well, thank you all so much for attending today. Have a great day.